The night my stepson told me to leave my own house, I didn't argue, I simply smiled. He thought he was taking everything my late husband left behind, but what he didn't know was that one hidden document in the safe upstairs would soon turn his world upside down. My name is Margaret Carter, and I'm 65 years old. For 40 years, I lived beside a man who built his life from nothing. My husband, Henry Carter. He was kind, wise, and fiercely protective. When he passed away last spring, a strange quietness settled over this big brick house in Savannah, Georgia. The same house where laughter once echoed now felt like a museum of memories. His books still open on the study desk, his watch still resting on the nightstand beside mine. Henry had been married once before me. From that first marriage came his only son, David. David never accepted me as family. He tolerated me, polite on the surface, but behind his smile, I could always sense calculation. When Henry was alive, he kept peace between us. But the moment my husband's heart stopped, so did David's manners. At first, he came with sympathy, calling me Mom for the first time in years, bringing groceries, fixing lights, asking about my health. I wanted to believe the kindness was real. But within weeks, he began showing up with his wife, Kayla, a sharp-tongued woman with expensive handbags and eyes that judged every corner of my home. They said they wanted to help me manage things. The day of Henry's funeral, as I stood in black by the oak tree where his ashes were scattered, David whispered near my ear, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything now." At the time, those words sounded comforting. But now, as I look back, I realize he wasn't offering help, he was announcing control. A month after the funeral, they started staying here on weekends. Then weekends turned into weekdays. Soon, I was the guest in my own home. One Sunday morning, I came down to the kitchen and saw Kayla rearranging my dishes. She didn't even look up. "These old plates don't match the vibe we're creating," she said casually. "We'll order something modern. Maybe marble white, more influencer-friendly." I stood there, coffee cup in hand, speechless. She called my home her studio. She called my memories old clutter. By the time spring turned to summer, their tone had changed completely. David stopped asking and started ordering. Kayla began introducing guests to the house as our property. And one evening, as we sat at the dinner table, my husband's chair still empty beside me, David finally said the words that sliced through me like glass. "We've talked about it, Margaret. You should think about moving out. This place is too big for you alone, and Kayla needs the upstairs for her content studio." I remember setting my fork down quietly. The sound of metal against china echoed in the silence that followed. They watched me, expecting tears, a breakdown, a plea. But all I did was nod once. "I see," I said softly. And I excused myself from the table. Upstairs, in the room where Henry's scent still lingered, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the old mahogany safe in the corner. It was the same safe he'd once told me never to forget. "If anything ever happens to me, Margaret, promise you'll open it." That night, I made good on my promise. Inside the safe was a leather folder, sealed with a gold clasp. Embossed on its cover were the words, "Henry Carter Family Trust, Confidential." My hands trembled as I opened it, because deep down I already knew, this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs. I wanted to scream, to tell her this was my kitchen, my life, my husband's home. But I didn't. I simply placed the cup on the counter, turned, and walked away. I had learned long ago that silence could be louder than any argument. Over the next few weeks, my world became smaller. They began taking over every space. The living room filled with camera lights, tripods, and ring lamps for Kayla's online videos. Her laughter, artificial and rehearsed, replaced the quiet hum of the old clock on the mantel. The smell of Henry's cologne that once lingered in the halls was now drowned out by floral perfume and the constant sound of notifications. They turned my memories into a background set for their social media fame. And when I objected, David said, almost kindly, "It's just temporary, Margaret. You should be proud we're keeping the family house alive." But I wasn't proud. I was invisible. Then came the dinner that changed everything. It was a humid evening in July, the air thick with tension and the scent of roasted chicken. David sat at the head of the table, in Henry's chair. and Kayla scrolled through her phone while talking about brand collaborations. Halfway through the meal, David cleared his throat. His tone was formal, rehearsed. "We've been thinking, Margaret," he began, eyes fixed on his plate. "You deserve some peace. Maybe somewhere smaller, quieter. There's a senior community near the coast. We can help you settle there." My fork froze mid-air. "You're suggesting I move out?" I asked softly. Kayla laughed, without even looking up. "It's not suggesting, it's planning ahead. This house needs to evolve. And honestly, you deserve a rest. You've had your time." I stared at her, my heartbeat steady but heavy. "And where would I go?" I asked. David leaned back, crossing his arms. "We can discuss that later. The point is, Kayla needs the upstairs for her studio. The lighting there is perfect." For a moment, the world slowed. Their words faded, replaced by the quiet ringing in my ears. It was the same sound I'd heard when Henry's doctor told me, "He's gone." Loss had a sound, and I was hearing it again. I placed my napkin beside my plate, rose slowly, and said in a voice that surprised even me, "If you're taking the upstairs, I'll start packing my things tonight." They exchanged triumphant glances, mistaking compliance for surrender. But as I walked upstairs, my mind was already working differently. For years, they had seen me as a harmless old woman. They didn't know that behind those quiet eyes lived the woman who had once managed Henry's finances, handled every investment, and signed every trust document he ever made. That night, when the house grew still and the only sound was the chirping of crickets outside, I unlocked the safe again. The papers inside were no longer just memories, they were weapons. On top was the one document David and Kayla had no idea existed. Carter Family Living Trust, Trustee Authority, Margaret A. Carter. I ran my fingers along the embossed gold letters and whispered to the air. "Henry, you planned for this, didn't you?" And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and sent a single email. To Henry's old lawyer, Mr. Wallace. The subject line was only 3 words. Activate Clause 9B. I didn't know what would happen next, but a strange calm had settled inside me, the kind that comes when fear finally burns itself out. When I came downstairs, David and Kayla were already at the table. They looked like a picture-perfect couple, matching robes, coffee mugs, smiles staged for an invisible audience. "Morning," Kayla said sweetly, her voice coated in sugar. "We were just talking about renovations. The upstairs will look incredible once we repaint and take down those old curtains." "Renovations?" I asked, pouring my coffee slowly. David leaned forward, his tone casual but firm. "Yes, we've decided to start early. You don't mind moving your things downstairs today, right?" My hand tightened around the mug. For a second, I thought about all the years I'd spent making this house a home. Henry's laughter in the study, his notes in the margins of his books, the smell of his favorite aftershave lingering in the hallways. And now they wanted to turn all that into a backdrop for vanity. I smiled faintly. "Of course," I said. "I'll take care of it." Kayla blinked, caught off guard by my compliance. "That's great. I didn't expect you to be so cooperative." I simply nodded. She had no idea that while she was planning wall colors, the bank was already reviewing ownership under the trust's violation clause. By noon, I was in Henry's old office, quietly scanning every page in that trust folder. The language was dense, legal, but I understood the essence. If any heir attempted to alter, sell, or transfer property belonging to the Carter Trust without the trustee's consent, meaning mine, the trust would immediately freeze all assets and initiate liquidation proceedings. In simple words, the moment David tried to claim the house as his, he would destroy his own inheritance. Later that day, the lawyer, Mr. Wallace, called. His voice was calm but carried a note of curiosity. "Mrs. Carter, I received your email. Are you certain you wish to activate Clause 9B? Once triggered, it cannot be reversed." I looked out the window at David and Kayla laughing beside the car Henry once loved, the one they'd painted white to fit their brand aesthetic. "Yes," I said. "Activate it." There was a long pause on the line, and then, Understood. You'll receive formal notice within 48 hours. But, Mrs. Carter, be prepared. They'll find out soon. That evening, Kayla walked into my room without knocking, holding a folder of home design sketches. We're repainting the hall tomorrow, she said, waving the papers. Oh, and David's meeting with a banker about refinancing. We want to expand the deck. It'll increase the property's value. I looked up from my laptop and met her eyes. Refinancing. Yes, she chirped. We'll use Dad's name on the paperwork like before. It's all in the family, right? The next moment was almost cinematic. My heart didn't race, it steadied. Because I knew the exact consequence of what she'd just said. That single act, refinancing, would violate the trust entirely. And by morning, this house would no longer be their property at all. As she left humming to herself, I closed my laptop and whispered under my breath. Enjoy your last night in this house, Kayla. The clock ticked softly in the quiet room, and for the first time since Henry's death, I felt something like peace. The next morning began deceptively calm. Sunlight touched the curtains, birds sang outside, and for a fleeting moment the world looked ordinary. But by mid-afternoon, the storm I had set in motion began to unfold, not in the skies above, but within the walls of the house my husband built. I was in the garden trimming the roses when I heard the sound of tires screeching. David's SUV pulled into the driveway, and he slammed the door harder than necessary. Kayla followed, her phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp and panicked. I stayed where I was, quietly snipping dead leaves. Mother. David's voice cut through the quiet. Did you do something? The bank just froze our account. I turned, pruning shears still in hand. Our account. I repeated softly. Don't play games with me, he snapped. They said the property ownership is under review. They're talking about a trust, some kind of violation. Kayla interrupted, waving her phone. They said something about clause 9? Whatever it is, it's your fault. You've been meddling with Dad's estate. Her words hit the air like darts, but I didn't flinch. I took off my gloves, set them on the garden bench, and said quietly, if the bank contacted you, that means they've already begun the process. What process? David demanded. I walked past him toward the porch steps, my heart steady as stone. The process your father designed, I said. The one that activates when someone tries to take what doesn't belong to them. He froze. What are you talking about? I stopped halfway up the steps and looked back at him. The Carter Family Trust, I said simply. Clause 9b. For a moment, silence swallowed the yard. Kayla lowered her phone slowly. You mean this house? Is no longer yours, I finished for her. Or anyone's. It's under legal protection now. Every attempt to refinance, every false signature, every brand collaboration made under its name is considered breach of trust. David's face turned pale. You can't do this. You don't have that kind of authority. I opened the screen door and stepped inside. You're right, I said softly, I don't have that authority. But your father gave it to me. By evening, the first bank representative arrived. A serious-looking man in a dark suit, briefcase in hand, asking to see property documents. I sat at the dining table, the same one where David once ordered me to move out, and handed him the file from the safe. He flipped through the papers, nodded once, and said to David in a clipped tone, Sir, I'm afraid your recent loan application triggered an automatic clause within the family trust. The property is now frozen under foreclosure procedure. You'll need to vacate within 30 days unless the trustee, he glanced at me, decides otherwise. Kayla's voice rose, trembling with rage. You can't evict us. We live here. The banker's tone was purely professional. Legally speaking, ma'am, you were never the homeowners. That sentence broke something inside David. His bravado collapsed. He sat down, staring at the table, speechless. Kayla turned to me, her voice suddenly softer, desperate. Margaret, please. We didn't mean to disrespect you. We can fix this. I looked her in the eye. You can't fix greed, dear. It collapses on its own. They left the room in silence. I could hear Kayla crying in the hallway, her phone buzzing with missed calls from sponsors who'd already heard about her property dispute. The same evening, she deleted every photo she'd ever posted from inside this house. When night fell, I walked into Henry's old study. The rain began tapping against the window, soft at first, then steady. On the desk lay the trust documents, illuminated by a single lamp. I touched his name on the signature line, tracing the ink with my fingertips. "You planned for this, didn't you, Henry?" I whispered. "You knew they'd come for it someday." Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, I smiled, not with vengeance but relief. The storm had finally broken. And for once, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. The days that followed were strangely quiet, almost peaceful on my side of the house, but on theirs chaos reigned. I could hear the muffled arguments through the walls, doors slamming, Kayla's voice rising and breaking. Sometimes she shouted at David about branding damage, other times she cried about losing everything we've built. I wondered if she realized that what they had built was never theirs to begin with. 3 mornings later, an official envelope arrived. I didn't open it immediately. I already knew what it contained: formal notice of foreclosure activation. When I finally tore the seal, the language was sterile and cold. By order of the Carter Family Trust, ownership rights of the property known as 118 Willow Avenue have been suspended. Liquidation proceedings will commence within 10 business days unless remedied by the trustee. It was the exact outcome I had expected. The exact punishment Henry had designed for betrayal. I folded the letter neatly and set it on the mantel, beside his photograph. "You were a clever man," I murmured. That afternoon, the banker returned, same dark suit, same unreadable face. He met with David and Kayla in the dining room. I stayed in the kitchen, the sound of their voices carrying clearly through the air vent. "We can appeal this," David was saying, his tone desperate now. "This is our family home." "The home belongs to the trust, sir," replied the banker calmly. "And the trust belongs to your father's estate, under control of the trustee, Mrs. Margaret Carter." There was a long silence before I heard the sound of something shatter. A glass, maybe a plate. Kayla's voice broke next. "You said it was yours, David. You said everything would be ours once she was gone." I could almost see it, the two of them standing in the ruins of their entitlement, the same way people stand in a burned-down house, still insisting the walls are there. Later that night, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. "Margaret." It was David. His voice was low, almost childlike. "Can we talk?" I opened the door halfway. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red. For the first time in years, he looked lost. "I don't understand," he said. "Why would Dad set it up like this? Why would he give you control?" I studied him for a long moment. "Because he trusted me to protect what he built," I said quietly. "He didn't trust greed." He blinked, lips trembling, then whispered, "Please, can you stop this?" I sighed softly. I could, yes. But should I? He had no answer. Only silence. When he left, the faint scent of whiskey followed him, the smell of a man drowning in consequences. By the weekend, word had spread across the neighborhood. People whispered about the Carters losing their home, and that influencer couple in legal trouble. Kayla stopped going outside altogether. The lights in their half of the house stayed off most nights. I knew what was coming: denial, then anger, then collapse. On the 10th day, the for sale notice appeared on the lawn. I stood behind the curtain and watched as 2 men hammered the sign into the wet ground. Rain streaked down the window pane, making their outlines blur. David came out barefoot, yelling, "You can't do this." But they ignored him. Kayla followed, mascara streaked, clutching her phone like a lifeline that no longer connected to anyone. The car that arrived next wasn't theirs. It belonged to Blue Haven Investments LLC, the company that had just made the highest bid for the house. As the agents packed their files, one of them approached me quietly. "Mrs. Carter, everything is finalized. The new owner has full possession rights as of Monday." I smiled faintly, my fingers tightening around the mug of tea I was holding. "Thank you," I said. "Tell them I appreciate their efficiency." He nodded and left, never realizing that the woman standing before him was the new owner he was talking about. That night, I watched from my window as David and Kayla loaded their boxes into the SUV. The air was heavy with rain and humiliation. Kayla turned once toward my side of the yard. Even through the glass, I could see her glare, hatred mixed with disbelief. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I simply whispered into the empty room. You told me to leave, and now you're the one leaving. The taillights disappeared into the storm. Outside, the for sale sign stood gleaming under the rain. By Monday, it would read something new: private property, Blue Haven Investments. And by Tuesday, I would own it again. Legally, quietly, completely. Monday morning arrived with a kind of stillness that didn't belong to ordinary days. The air outside was clear, washed clean after last night's storm, and for the first time in months, the Carter house across the yard looked empty. Not quiet, empty. I brewed my coffee and stepped onto the porch, the wooden floor cool beneath my bare feet. From here, I could see the faint reflection of sunlight against the Blue Haven Investments sign planted in the wet soil. It gleamed like justice disguised as business. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black car pulled into the driveway. The bank agent stepped out, followed by a man in a charcoal gray suit. His voice carried easily through the crisp morning air. Official transfer of ownership will take effect immediately, he announced. Mrs. Carter, congratulations. The property is now legally under Blue Haven Investments LLC. I nodded politely, though inside I was trembling. Not with guilt, not even with excitement, but with a deep, quiet satisfaction. When they left, I went upstairs and unlocked the drawer of my writing desk. Inside was a thin folder labeled in my own handwriting. Blue Haven Corporate Holdings, Subsidiary Ownership. Beneath that, my signature. My company. My name. My house. I closed the drawer slowly, whispering to the empty room. You always told me, Henry, never let them see you coming. Later that afternoon, as I crossed the street toward what used to be their side of the house, I saw David's car parked halfway down the block. He was sitting inside, staring at the porch, the place where he once stood and told me to leave. I walked right past him, heels clicking against the pavement, and unlocked the door with the new key the bank had delivered that morning. The hinges creaked like they were sighing in relief. Inside, everything smelled of dust and cheap perfume. The furniture was gone, the curtains torn, but the walls, the bones of the house, still felt like home. I stepped into the dining room. That table. That same table where he'd sat across from me, full of arrogance, declaring that my time was over. I ran my hand across the polished wood and smiled faintly. There was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a young woman stood there, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Carter? I'm here for the property inspection. Just confirming, are you the new owner? Yes, I said, meeting her eyes. I've always been. By the time the sun dipped low, the house had changed its soul again. Curtains opened, windows cleaned, fresh air filling every corridor. I found one of Henry's old books still tucked behind the shelf, The Art of Silent Strategy. He'd underlined a single line. The loudest victory is the one no one hears. That night, I sat in the living room, my living room, and watched the porch light glow against the dark. Somewhere across town, David and Kayla were likely arguing over what went wrong, blaming each other for a fall they caused together. And I, the woman they'd called useless, invisible, too old, had reclaimed everything without shouting, without fighting, without lifting anything more than a pen. When the clock struck midnight, I locked the doors, took a deep breath, and whispered to the house. We're home again. For weeks afterward, life moved with a strange, deliberate slowness. The noise that had once filled every hallway was gone, only silence remained, but it was a silence that belonged to me now. Every sound, every breath inside those walls was mine again. I started spending my mornings in the garden Henry and I planted years ago. The roses had withered while David and Kayla were here, but under my care, they began to bloom again. It felt poetic, the same soil that had been trampled by greed now giving life back to beauty. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants, a familiar car stopped in front of the gate. David stepped out. He looked different, older, exhausted, wearing the same suit he'd once bragged about buying for $10,000, now wrinkled and faded. He approached slowly, as though unsure whether he even belonged on the same street anymore. "I'm not here to argue," he said quietly through the gate. "I just wanted to understand." I didn't answer, just kept watering the roses. "Why did you do it?" he asked finally. "Why didn't you warn me? You could have told me about the trust. You could have stopped all this." I looked up at him then, the boy I had once tried to love like my own son, now hollowed out by his own arrogance. "David," I said softly, "you were warned. Not by me, by your father. But you never listened. You thought you were smarter than everyone else, even him." He lowered his gaze. "He never trusted me." "He wanted to," I replied. "But trust has to be earned. You tried to take what wasn't yours. The moment you did that, the house responded exactly as your father designed it to." He was silent for a long moment, then whispered, "So it's all gone? Everything?" I nodded. "Everything you built on lies collapses eventually." He swallowed hard, nodded once, and turned away. Before leaving, he said one last thing, almost to himself. "You won, Margaret." I watched him walk away without replying. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about balance, the world finding its way back to what was right. That night, I sat in the living room with a cup of chamomile tea, the warm glow of the fireplace wrapping around me. I could still hear Henry's voice in my head. "Never fight with fire, Margaret. Just turn off the oxygen." I smiled faintly. That's exactly what I had done. A few days later, I met with Mr. Wallace, the lawyer, to finalize one last document. The trust was now closed, the house legally transferred into my private ownership through Blue Haven Holdings. As he handed me the final file, he said with a grin, "I've been practicing law for 30 years, Mrs. Carter, and I don't think I've ever seen a more elegant act of justice." I laughed softly. "Justice doesn't always shout, Mr. Wallace. Sometimes it whispers." That evening, I invited a small group of women from the neighborhood, mostly widows like me, for tea. I told them my story, not to boast, but to remind them that no one is ever truly powerless. By the end of that night, an idea had taken shape. A foundation that would help older women learn about property law, finance, and how to protect themselves from the kind of betrayal I had endured. I named it the Henry Carter Foundation, not for what was lost, but for what was preserved. As I stood at the window watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had lived quietly, shrinking myself to make room for others. Now, for the first time, I was standing in a home that no one could take from me. Not by force, not by deceit, not by bloodline. This was mine. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Rest now, Henry. Everything is as it should be." Outside, the night was still. The roses rustled softly in the breeze, the sound of peace returning home. 6 months passed. The seasons changed, and with them, so did I. My hair had grown silver white, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in decades. The house, once a battlefield of betrayal, had become a sanctuary again, filled with laughter, music, and the scent of fresh-baked bread that drifted through the open windows each Sunday afternoon. Every corner now told a story, not of pain, but of perseverance. Henry's old study had been transformed into an office for my foundation. Files, grant papers, and correspondence filled the desk where his ledgers once sat. Women from all over Columbus came to learn, to rebuild, and to reclaim what life had taken from them. Some were widows like me. Others were divorced or abandoned, carrying the same invisible scars I once did. I listened to their stories over tea and shortbread cookies, teaching them about property rights, financial independence, and most importantly, dignity. One morning, while reviewing new scholarship applications, a familiar knock echoed at my door. When I opened it, I found Eleanor, my young assistant, standing beside an unexpected visitor, Kayla. Gone was the arrogance, the diamond jewelry, the curated perfection of her influencer persona. She looked human. Her makeup was faint, her hands trembling as she clutched a thin envelope. "Mrs. Carter," she said quietly, eyes lowered. "I know I'm the last person you want to see." I studied her face for a moment. There was no anger in me anymore, only a detached curiosity. "Come in," I said softly. You look like you could use some tea. She hesitated before stepping inside. As I poured her a cup, she spoke, her voice small and fragile. David left. Went to Chicago looking for work. I stayed behind. I lost the apartment last month. I nodded slowly, letting her continue. I thought I could handle everything. The fame, the followers, the life we built online. But when it all collapsed, there was nothing left. No one cared once the money stopped. Her eyes met mine then, watery and full of something I'd never seen in her before, sincerity. I came to apologize, she whispered. For how we treated you. For not seeing who you were. For a long time, I said nothing. I simply watched her, letting the silence stretch like a mirror between us. Finally, I spoke. Kayla, forgiveness isn't a gift you ask for. It's something you earn. But acknowledgement, that's a start. She nodded quickly, tears spilling over. I'm trying to start over, she said. I heard about your foundation. I want to help, even if it's just sweeping floors or filing papers. There it was, the twist life had reserved for its final act. The woman who once mocked me for being old-fashioned now stood before me, humbled, asking for a chance to begin again. I smiled faintly. If you're willing to work, there's always room here. Her relief was immediate, visible in the soft collapse of her shoulders. Weeks later, she began volunteering at the foundation, quiet, steady, and sincere. I watched as she learned the same lessons I had to learn through pain. That power doesn't come from followers or fortune, but from integrity. As spring returned, my garden flourished once more. The roses, deep crimson, Henry's favorite, lined the path leading to the porch. One afternoon, as I trimmed the petals, Eleanor joined me, holding the latest newsletter. We've just been featured in the Columbus Tribune, she said, beaming. They're calling you the matriarch of second chances. I laughed softly, shaking my head. I'm just a woman who refused to disappear. When evening fell, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the last light fade over the city. Across the street, the house that had once belonged to my stepson now stood dark and silent, a monument to lessons learned too late. I thought of Henry then, of everything he had left behind, not just wealth but wisdom. He'd always believed that true justice didn't come through revenge, but through revelation. And he was right. They had seen the truth, who I really was, not through anger, but through the calm certainty of consequence. As the clock chimed softly in the hall, I whispered into the quiet. You told me to protect what matters, Henry. I did. Outside, the roses swayed gently in the night breeze, their petals catching the glow of the porch light. I smiled to myself, feeling peace settle deep in my bones, the kind of peace that comes only after a storm. For years, I had been the silent woman in the background of someone else's story. Now the story was mine. Written in my voice on my terms, with no permission needed. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt whole. Some people fight to be seen. Others simply build something so unshakable that the world can't look away.